Hi again, me. It's been a while. I'm now almost 2 months into camp, and it took a lot of time for me to actually read what's really a short book, um, just because no time, and when I do have time, I just want to sleep. But with that being said, shout out to McCoy's bed being behind me for this. I've just finished reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. This took me a little over a month to read, which isn't great in reality. Yeah, I probably spent 6 hours reading it. I had just no time to do anything. Yeah. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is a really, really interesting novel, because obviously it falls in line with having read Tom Sawyer before this, and it's more of a sequel, but also an independent story. This book ends up getting a bad rap, I think, because it says the N-word a lot in it. But I don't believe this book is racist. If anything, I think it's the opposite. I think it's about overcoming racism. A thing that gets looked at a couple different times with Huck Finn's adventure is really him trying to fight against his upbringing. Growing up in a situation and in a society and a culture in which people are slaves, and people who are slaves are destined to be slaves, and they're nothing more than that. And he fights against that a lot. He really, really does. And he overcomes a lot of things. And there's a lot of things where he fights against just basic traditional, what we consider morality, in order to justify what he's doing, because he's fighting against his own belief structure, right? Kind of towards the end, there's this kind of thing of the questioning of does he fight against, at this point, Jim, who is the slave that is running away, has been basically captured and is being held as really like the big final last standoff type deal. And Huck Finn has to make the choice of, does he just leave? Because at this point, he is free to go. Huck Finn is free to go. He has all the money he wants. He is free to go. Or does he stay back and basically go against his entire upbringing to try and free Jim? And he decides to go and try to free Jim. I'm trying to remember what the exact line is, but it's basically along the lines of he's asking himself whether what he's doing will send him to hell. And then he goes back and thinks on everything that he's done in his life, and he decides that, you know what, I'm going to hell anyway. I might as well make sure that I've done everything I can to get there. So yeah, it's a lot of fighting against upbringing, which is really, I think, the big ordeal to this. And part of that comes with the idea of, using the incorrect words and incorrect language, even when you're trying to fight it. And I think that still goes for the modern world to a huge extent, is that what we want from people is to change who they are and become more accepting, and not hate people for something that they are, right? We want people to accept others no matter their race or religion or gender identity or things like that. And sometimes it takes people fighting against their entire upbringing to be able to do that, and we have to be willing to work with that. And in all reality, we have to be willing to work with that. Change doesn't just come immediately. Change takes work, and we have to be willing to accept that, as hard as it may be. I think overall, right, this book comes down to like one line, kind of right at the very, very beginning. I want to say it's in chapter 8. Yes. So the beginning of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn basically starts out with Huck Finn. He has been given this reward that was from the Tom Sawyer saga. He's been given this financial reward, and basically it's hounding him. People are coming to him to ask for money. He's basically getting a stipend, I guess, from the judge, because the judge is the one taking care of all the money. And Huck Finn's father comes back into the picture and is trying to take all the money and is trying to sue people to get the money back. And basically what Huck Finn ends up doing is basically selling the money to the judge for like $1. That's really all. That's really what ends up coming to, so that he no longer has the money, because all Huck Finn wants is to be free and to be, his own person and to do whatever he wants in life. And then we see this exact same situation happen with Jim. Jim is a slave, and all he wants is to be free. That's all he wants. And towards the end of chapter 8, basically they're talking about how much Jim is worth as a slave. And basically all Jim wants is just to own himself and to be allowed to do what he wants with his life, instead of being forced into labor and forced to work, right? All he wants to do is own himself, which is the exact same thing that Huck Finn wants. And I think it is this desire that the two of them share of just being like wanting to own oneself. That is what creates a bond between the two of them. Yeah. Book itself, I mean, it's a little hard to follow. You have a really unreliable narrator. I think, without going back and rereading Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn as an adult, I think we tend to paint Huck Finn in a very poor light and Tom Sawyer in a very good light. But at the end of the day, especially at the end of this book when Tom Sawyer gets reintroduced, Tom Sawyer is the bad guy here. Huck Finn is the good guy. Tom Sawyer is the bad guy. All Tom Sawyer wants is to romanticize life, which is great and it's wonderful, but he does so at the cost of people's lives. And it's certainly not enjoyable. And, Tom gets away with a lot of lying and cheating and stealing because he has this reputation of being a really good guy, this really upstanding boy. Whereas Huck Finn, because of who he was, tends to get a very poor rap with no matter what he does, which I think is a really interesting dynamic that kind of gets exposed right at the end of the book, about past doings and current virtues. But yeah, I mean, Tom Sawyer at the end of the book is just a real asshole in all reality. You have the opportunity to, and everyone's on board at this point of trying to free Jim. And basically, there's two ways to look at this. Either Tom could have immediately said, hey, Miss Watson's dead and she's freed Jim from, and he can go now, or take the super simple and super easy way to free him, right? Of like, take 30 minutes with a saw and be done with it. And I mean, he refuses to take either step. He wants to romanticize and go by like what's his, I mean, what 1800s, 1700s fantasy novelizations have people doing for escapes, and that's what he really kind of follows. And basically Jim ends up being enslaved for another 4 weeks, basically in chains, not able to move, because Tom wants to pull off this great grand adventure, and ends up getting Tom shot, you know. And it's just, you know, I don't know if that's meant for us to look now at Tom in a bad light when looking at this, especially when so much of this has to do with the overcoming of how we were raised, and Tom is the one person who sticks to how he is raised. I don't know. Yeah. This kind of novelization of the boy adventures of both Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn really kind of sets the standard for really kind of early American writing. It's really this kind of narrative that gets kind of copied a lot when we talk about like American coming of age stories, and like I think it's just gonna keep staying that way, because a lot of coming of age stories are, especially ones that are like have multiple versions in them. Both Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, I should say, are very much like there's a lot of very small stories that lead to one big thing, and I think that's true for a lot of American kind of young, you know, late elementary school, early middle school, late middle school writing is this kind of thing of a lot of very, very small stories that really tie into one big theme. But yeah, overall, 6 out of 10, I guess. It was an enjoyable book, but it just took a lot to read. It's a little hard to read because of unreliable narrator and because of the switching back and forth between standard English and dialect English. There's a lot of switching back and forth, especially when it comes to any of the African American characters, any of the slave characters. Sometimes they speak in like pretty good standardized English, and then a lot of times then they switch back to the dialect, and it makes them very inconsistent. It makes them a little hard to read. But yeah, other than that, 6 out of 10. I think it's a fair enough rating. I wouldn't teach this, and I wouldn't want to teach this, just because I don't think it's complicated enough for adults to try and get around this idea of like overcoming your background and overcoming who you are, and you know, to get to a better place. That's already complicated enough for an adult to understand, and maybe you could teach it a little bit to, you know, middle school or even early high school, but like then we get into the whole argument of, but you've also said that I can't be who I want to be, so why are you trying to force me into this way of thinking, and you know, a whole bunch of stuff that's contradicting to what we also teach kids. Anyways, that's that. Yeah.